Welcome, everybody, to the Nuggets of Gold podcast. I am Matt. I'm here today with Aiden. We're going to be talking about the J.J. Watt move to the Arizona Cardinals and talking about how that impacts the NFC West and the 49ers. And first off, I'd like to say that J.J. Watt, one of the best defensive players ever. Like, he really is. I think people kind of forget like how dominant he was early on in his career. Three-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner. And he's still a very good player. Last season, a little bit of a down year, only 5 sacks in 16 games. His tackle for loss numbers and just overall stats weren't as high. I would also have to say that the Texans not a very good place to be right now. So I think that's a lot of it. Like, if you're an offensive team, like, and you're playing against J.J. Watt and the Texans defense, you're going to double team him a lot. So I think that has a factor in like why his numbers went down a little bit. And then a couple other stats. 2019, he had 4 sacks in 8 games. And then 2018, he had 16 sacks in 16 games. Also 18 tackles for losses and 7 forced fumbles. So 2018 was a vintage J.J. Watt year. And honestly, I think it's a great move for the Cardinals. I think it's very smart. I think pairing him with Chandler Jones I think that's a really nasty duo. Now, the big question with the whole move is, can J.J. Watt stay on the field? I'm interested to see whether or not the Cardinals use him on like all the time, or they kind of put him on a limited snap count, because I think that's what you should do with him, especially at this point in his career. Like, you don't need him out there every single play. So that's what I hope they do. I mean, he'll be 32 next year. Still a very good player, though. I think it's a really good deal. It's what, 2 years, 23
31.
million guaranteed, 31 total over 2 years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a fair deal. I think that's like what other teams would have offered him. But Aiden, what do you think about this move? Do you think it makes the Cardinals a little scarier?
I think it makes the Cardinals better. I think you touched on it, though. The key for them is going to be staying healthy. I think Chandler Jones is making $20 million a year, and J.J. Watt's making what? Somewhere around 14 to 15. You got 35 tied up in 2 guys, and Chandler Jones played 5 games last year. J.J. Watt did play all 16, but take that with a grain of salt. He's going to be 32. So the key for them is keeping those 2 guys on the field. We'll see if they're able to do that, but I will say that they're going to sacrifice some depth. So they might not be able to play a guy like J.J. Watt on a snap count as much as they would like to, given that I think I looked it up. They were projected to have somewhere around 17 million in cap space, and they just used 12 of it on a deal for 1 guy. So going to be really interesting to see what they do with the rest of their space. I mean, this was an 8-8 team last year who had a playoff spot on the line, really, and the Niners' third stringers came in and beat them up. I'm not too afraid of the Cardinals unless Kyler takes another step forward and we take another step back. I'd be hard pressed to see us finishing lower than them next year, even if they have a healthy J.J. Watt, which we don't even know what he's going to look like yet. Obviously, don't want to count like a guy like that out, but I think that's something to not freak out about.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think a lot of people, it's the name too. Like, oh, J.J. Watt, now they have superstar. And it's funny because I bet like probably a lot of people that watch the NFL like very like thoroughly recognize that J.J. Watt is not the caliber of player that Chandler Jones is at this point in their careers. And that's my opinion, at least. But people are going to hype up the J.J. Watt move and hype up him being like that star of the defensive line when he's really going to get to be the second fiddle for the first time in his career. So that'll be something that's interesting, because maybe it's something where it's like Watt's going to be, lined up next to Chandler Jones or lined up opposite him, even though he usually plays like 3 tech, or he usually plays a little bit inside. But I mean, he can play DN too. But Watt's going to be the number 2 guy there on that D line, and that's something that's super exciting. You also brought up just the impact of it on the cap of this signing. And what is that? If it's around like 5 million right now, I'm sure there's guys that they're going to be able to cut, as there are with every single team in the NFL. And I mean, we see that with the Niners. There's like Weston Richburg, D4. There's a bunch of guys, So maybe increases, but the Cardinals are still a team that has a lot of holes. That's why their defense has struggled, because it's like, okay, there's this, like for the last few years, it's been, oh, there's this dude Chandler Jones, and there's Budda Baker, and Pat Peterson's there, but Pat Peterson isn't quite what he is. He's going to be gone. And so there's a lot of holes there. Along with them, Marcus Golden and Hassan Reddick are free agents. And those aren't marquee guys by any means, but they're speed rushers. Hassan Reddick had a game last year where he had 5 sacks. He had no other stats. He had 5 sacks. And so those type of guys were just like, can you have like can the replacements that you bring in produce the same as the guys that are coming out? And can they take that next step as a defense as a whole? I think that's still up in the air because we don't know the other, like the corresponding moves after this. Because if you lose Golden and Hassan Reddick, like you got to find someone else on that, like a very fast edge rusher or a speed rush guy that, you can blitz and utilize just their talent, because Chandler Jones is, like I said, dominant player. JJ Watt isn't a speed rusher. Now his brother is. His brother's a really, really damn good speed rusher, but you need a complete defense if you want to be successful. And like you brought up, like when you think about how they compare with the Niners beat them with their third stringers. The Niners beat them twice last year in the year before, and they beat them one time with a bunch of injuries, and it was the Niners offense really carving up that defense. So I think they're still a little bit a ways away. No reason to panic for the 49ers. Overall, it's a signing of a 32-year-old defensive lineman, one that's very, very good, but it's for a team that has some holes. They got to figure some stuff out. So it's going to be interesting how their off season plays out, because if they make the right moves, they can be very scary next year. But I don't know, man. I think it's really interesting. And the offense, like I was saying about Kyler, like you want him to take those steps, but their offense wasn't good, so they got to improve that way too. What do they need to do now to like become like the top team in the NFC West?
I need to see something else out of Cliff Kingsbury. He has not been the offensive guru that he was supposed to be. He's been okay. He's done some new things, and he's helped develop Kyler a little bit, but he has not been the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan level offensive wizard that we thought that he might be. So for them to, the NFC West is so tough. They have a roster which if everything works out, you're able to hit a couple picks. Looks good, but you got some major question marks in that head coaching spot. And I think part of, like, you hear JJ Watt, you hear Chandler Jones, and that sounds like a really scary defensive line. But thinking back to the 2019 Niners, what made them so good wasn't that first group. It was that second group who came in and was able to spell those first 4 guys. We had like 7 or 8 rotational, solid defensive pass rushers, which I think is super duper important, almost more important than having 2 really good guys. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens when JJ Watt gets tired. Who comes in? Can you afford Marcus Golden? Can you afford Hassan Reddick to come in? Because if all those guys come back, I'm a little bit more worried. I'm not going to lie. But again,
that's the big question, though. Are they even going to be able to bring them back?
Big if. I think if they are, it looks a little bit better, but I don't see where they're going to find the money. So I'm going to proceed as though they can't. But maybe they're able to bring one of those guys back. But again, like, you have one good linebacker, and he was your first-round pick last year, and he wasn't even all that good. So you better hope that he continues to develop into the guy that he was in college, or you have major question marks in the defensive backfield and at linebacker and depth at defensive line. So
yeah,
they're one of those. Super worried about them yet.
They're one of those defenses right now that have a couple very good foundational pieces to build around, but they don't have a lot of money, and they need to get those guys to come in and produce, because the Cardinals are clearly trying to make a roster to make the playoffs. They were they a game back last year? Did they just lose the tiebreaker?
I think if they won week 16 against us, they would have been in the driver's seat to make the playoffs, but then they lost 17 as well, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because didn't Kyler not play?
It was something weird like that, yeah.
Yeah, it was
that's a huge point. Like, they need to find these defensive guys now before you have to pay Kyler. Because as soon as you pay Kyler, like we've seen it a bunch of different times, it gets a lot harder to pay JJ Watt 15 million when Kyler's making 30. So you got to find these young guys who can play now before you pay your quarterback, what is it, 35 million, and that's what he's
I mean, he
going to
might
get
make
paid
more.
in. I mean, yeah, in like 2 years. So they
So
are
the
on the clock.
last thing I'm gonna end out on, how much pressure does this bring to Cliff? Because I think it brings a lot. Because you have some guys on defense, they're gonna make plays. Watt's gonna make plays. Maybe their defense will, allow a lot of points, allow a lot of yards, and the other offenses will be successful against them. But we're going to see J.J. Watt strip sack. We're going to see Chandler Jones strip sack. We're going to see Budda Baker get interceptions. Like we know those players are going to make big-time plays. Can their offense be elite, and can they be elite enough to win by carrying that defense? They're not going to be a bottom 5 defense. They're not going to be a bottom 10 defense. But if the offense is able to really carry them and be successful, we're going to see that, there's some more investment. Okay, Cliff is the guy. But if they're not, if their offense isn't able to do that, and keep in mind, they have a guy that I don't know if you view him as a star quarterback, Aiden. I view Kyler Murray as a star quarterback. And he's young, but I still think he's a star guy. I think it's a little bit early to believe that he could be a top 5 guy. I think he will at one point in his career. I think he's that good. But it's hard for the Cardinals organization to look at this team and go, Cliff, you had these really good players on defense, and the defense was all right, but they made plays for you, and your offense wasn't able to carry you guys to victory. That's a problem. So I think that is like the big question I have with this moving forward. Can their offense take that step into dominance? Even though this is a defensive signing, it's so odd. But can their offense like really get over that hump and be elite? Because if they're elite, the floor for their defense, if their star players are healthy, is pretty high. So
Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking. Do you think that's the biggest like pressure move for them?
for sure. I think if they don't make the playoffs, I think Cliff is gone. And honestly, like from that point of view, I don't hate the like I like the signing even more because if you're able to beef up that defense, you're going to see what you really have with Cliff. If he can't make it to the playoffs with this team, and I don't think that they will. I'm kind of coming across as a bit of a Cliff hater, but I'm not big on the Cliff hype train. But if he doesn't make the playoffs with this roster, I think that you have to blow it up. In terms of just coaching, I think Kyler is right now a fringe top 10 guy. I think you can win a Super Bowl with Kyler Murray. I think he's fantastic and young and is only going to continue to get better. So you got to find a guy to really be the head coach of this team. As a Niner fan, I obviously want to see a bad coach coaching the Cardinals for as long as I can. But thinking about it as the Cardinals GM, who also might get fired if this doesn't work out.
Yeah.
This is a bit of people were surprised when he survived the last coaching change. I think he's been their GM since like 2013, which is
He's
a
been
really
there.
long time.
It's Kime, right?
Mm-hmm. Which is a really long time. They've had multiple like top 5 picks. Usually a GM doesn't last that long without a couple winning seasons, which they really haven't had. So I think his job is on the line. I think Cliff Kingsbury's job is on the line, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of pressure. And you said you're a little bit of a Cliff hater. I think it's fair to question how Cliff has been. I mean, he hasn't won, and he's had Kyler Murray, he's had Pat Mahomes in college, and he just hasn't really been successful from a winning standpoint. Doesn't mean he can't turn it around. He absolutely can, but he definitely needs to improve a lot. So overall, I think it's a good move for the Arizona Cardinals. There is no reason whatsoever for the 49ers to try to, make it like play like a chess match with them. Okay, if you got this guy, we got to get this guy. The only thing I'll say, you got to pay Trent Williams. You just have to do it. You and I've been seeing that all over Twitter today. Hashtag pay Trent Williams. All for it. But I mean, this doesn't like make that becomes like an issue. Like that was already an issue. You already had to pay him.
Exactly.
But yeah.
So it was already priority number 1. It can't go any higher.
Yeah, I think that was one of our episodes recently. Yeah, it's priority number 1. Like we got to get it out there.
Yeah.
So hopefully Trent is back. But overall, good deal for the Cardinals. I think it makes them a little bit better. I think it's a very obvious move that they should make. But there's a lot of pressure in Arizona right now. So we'll see how it turns out. I still like the 49ers' chances against them, but overall, good move. If you're listening on YouTube, you like this video, leave a like, subscribe, all that stuff. And we'll be back later this week, but we had to get something out on this right away. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you guys later.